Welcome to Ferment Radio, a podcast series on bacterial and social fermentation. Fermentation can incite social action, spark creativity, and bring surprising new tastes to our lives. My name is Aga Pokrywka, and I invite you to join us in a conversation on living interconnectivities, from macro to micro, from societal to cellular, and from global to personal. We communicate with the outside world based on the information we receive through our senses. But just like fingerprints, no two people have the same brain anatomy, and therefore no two people can sense the world identically. We can't experience how other bodies feel, but can we attempt to describe it? Today, together with Pia Lindman, an artist and researcher working with performance art, healing as art, installation, microbes, architecture, painting and sculpture, we dive into the uniqueness of bodily experiences, even those caused by microorganisms. Pia calls this the subsensorial. Due to my heightened sensitivity after a state of poisoning by mercury, I discovered that I suffered from indoor air, especially in houses infested with mold. Mold may produce nerve toxins similar to mercury, and my nervous system, now well trained, reacts to these toxins. In moldy houses, I experience pain, electric shocks running through my nerves, and cognitive difficulties accompanied by hallucinatory effects. My heightened sensitivity is now a medium that allows me to receive more signals from the cells of my body, of chemical and energetic events, and to have these signals reach some sorts of a pre-conscious consciousness of my mind. These are signs that are usually filtered out by the brain, but are now, in my mind, translated into various mind things, like for example visuals, melodies, worlds, movements and colors. Perhaps one could call this process a multiple form of synesthesia. I call this interstitial work of mind and body, this intermediary space and time of signals and synesthesia, the subsensorial. After reading that fragment by Pia Lindman, I wanted to learn more about her unique subsensorial experiences and share them with you. This is what she told us. I kind of didn't know what is subsensorial. I had to read.
Well,
I
invented that word. So
seriously?
It's not
That's a good word.
Dictionary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but you've managed to give it a name,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very interesting. Like maybe it's this feeling when you were a kid and you were learning, the words for things, and they suddenly start to exist more because they have that name.
Mm-hmm.
So, in one of the previous Ferment Radio episodes. The title of this episode is actually after the title of the book the guest of that episode wrote, and the book is called Microbes and Other Shamanic Beings. And the book is written by Cesar Herrera, and it's about, so he is originated from Colombia,
mm-hmm.
and he researches, among many things, the pre-Columbian shamans in nowadays Colombia, in that territory, and what the European missionaries or explorers saw, or how they called what they saw. So what they saw was that, okay, there are some local shamans and they believe in spirits and so on. But what he is kind of proving in this publication is that shamans, especially like in some rituals involving, for example, ayahuasca, they were able to see microbes. Those were actually not the spirits. So what is happening that apparently there is some chemical which influences your eye as a lens, and that it starts to kind of magnify what is on the surface of the lens. So for example, if the shaman was involving, for example, with the healing of a patient, who was suffering of some, I don't know, virus or some microbial infection, they would be able to identify the disease or the spirit in Europe from European perspective, which is kind of possessing the person, but basically it was their kind of a beginning of microbiology, right? We've been talking in that episode quite a lot exactly about what is science and how we are able to perceive the world around us just because of the notions we currently have. So in the 17th century or 16th century, there was no microbiology. There was no understanding of, for example, diseases which could be of like a microbial origin. But somewhere else than in Europe, there was a way to assess that kind of a knowledge, but it was not called microbiology, and they were not using a gear to see it, but other kind of ways to identify those things. It made me think, is it subsensorial? Is it subsensorial what the Colombian shamans were able to see?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I'm really struck by this story because I remember looking at the beings traveling over my eye, in both eyes, and asking my mother, what is it that I'm seeing? Because I'm seeing all these things floating around. And she said that maybe they are the microbes.
No, and you are not the first person who was telling about these experiences, because people who listened to that episode, or I was telling what this episode is about, you are not the first person who was telling me like, hey, but I've seen something like which looks like a microscopic images, but I always thought that it's like whatever. But this entropic vision, it can happen with a certain angle of the light, for example.
Yeah, I think it always was connected with a certain sunny day, a certain way of looking.
It's totally possible. Yeah. So maybe you did experience this.
Yeah, that's really. Another thing that comes to mind is when I was in Sao Paulo with the biennial there. Incerteza Viva, and one of the collaborants with the biennial that year was Pete Webb, who also is a permaculturist, has a farm outside of Sao Paulo, and also is a Gaia educator, if you know the Gaia system. And we ended up having these conversations with a mycologist that I met in Chile, Juliana Fursi. And we were talking exactly about mycelium and obviously the communication of the trees amongst each other through the help of the mycelia, both the root system and the mycelia. And Juliana Fursi has her organization is called Fundación Fungi, and she single-handedly was able to convince the Chilean government that whenever they do an environmental impact assessment, they have to look into the impact on mycelia. Because without mycelia, there would be nothing. Nothing would grow. But anyway, so Pete, he told us in that conversation that he spent 3 years with a Native American, South American tribe, living with them in the jungle. I can't remember the name of the tribe right now, but I can find out. And whenever the people in the tribe saw that there were some problems, that the trees weren't doing well, what they would do, they would dance for the trees on the soil. And we all immediately, that's because of the mycelium. The mycelium needed the stimulation of the dancing, the vibration.
Some frequency.
Yeah. So obviously, again, this is not clinical science. This is anecdotal. But if people are wondering what concretely is the relationship of microbes to experience or growth or health or anything, to me, that's like a good way of starting. That dancing can be healing for trees because you're actually creating this communication this connection dialogue with the organisms that are also then connected to the tree or the plant.
But coming back to the very beginning, because we used in this conversation this term subsensorial, which you came up with.
Yeah.
So maybe you can tell.
Well, I mean, of course, I'm also tracing the idea of the subsensorial with this idea of how to dance for the mycelium.
Yeah,
if the first experiences of the subsensorial, at least for me, has been the signals that my body is sending me about something not being in a good organization in my body, for instance, a migraine headache. That's a message, like something's not happening in a way in my body that is, my nervous system, my brain is getting signals that it transforms into headaches.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a very basic idea of the subsensorial that, for instance, if I'm in a space where there's mycotoxins, toxic mold, I will get a migraine headache. And it will come maybe even a day after I've been to this space. Or I get vertigo. And then I have to start translating this message, like what's going on? What did I take in? What happened to my nervous system? What was the signal that it was getting? And that's a way to look at it like an instrument to understand how the environment is impacting you on a kind of a health body level. But for me, the subsensorial is much more than just that. It is also about like the example of dancing for the mycelia. That's another way of working subsensorially, that you are sending a message that you can contribute to the sort of constant husband and murmur of the universe, if you want to say it that way.
So what's your earliest memory that you kind of felt that there is this dialogue window, let's say, right? Because as you said, it goes both directions. Do you have like some experience which was kind of crucial to start to think that direction?
I mean, for me, the sort of this big leap happened quite late in my life because I did get sick from toxic mold. And before that, I discovered that, I got sick and I discovered that I was sick from mercury poisoning. And mercury is a nerve toxin. And whilst going through this huge crisis health-wise in terms of the mercury, I literally could sort of sense how my nervous system transformed and became something that it is now, which is that it is super sensitive, and I get these reactions that I have to learn to understand. So there's a background to this whole work that comes from severe urgency about the body, and not only that, it's a severe urgency about the body in relation to pollutants in the world. So to me also there's that bigger picture about hey, what is it that we're doing to ourselves and everybody else and everything else in this world when we are, messing with a lot of pollutants. But when you ask me in this way, what would be my earliest memory or experience, then I start to think of much deeper questions about that also involve my psyche. And that's definitely not something that you should sort of cut away from this conversation. If you are sort of trying to have a connection and understand what happens in your body, in your system, and in the world in a subsensorial level, you also need to kind of understand that whatever micro messages your body, your soul, your cells, or your nervous system is kind of sending out into the body, and then when they reach your awareness, your brain, obviously your psychology will contribute to the interpretation of those signals. So it's always a combination. And when you're talking about these first experiences, I'm thinking of a very early childhood experience where I was deeply traumatized and had an out-of-body experience. So I was 4. So I think that for me, possibly that kind of experience has been something that has sort of already set my psyche onto a course where I'm sort of ready to understand that messages might be coming through that might seem weird or hallucinogenic, but are actually part of the world of experience. And so that I think that was something that definitely has set the course for me. A second thing would have been at the age of 12, going out on a ski trip into the archipelago, early spring with this amazing sun, and traversing through landscapes in a particular way. It's a particular embodied way where you're skiing, so you're able to move reasonably fast, and you're able to move over places that you otherwise wouldn't, like ice, and just crossing an island back onto ice, and these amazing moments. And of course, at the time of the year when you're on one side of the island, it's winter. You go onto the other side of the island, it looks like summer because the sun has already. So there are these moments that are very, very miracle, seem like miracles, like these mysteries. And I remember doing that at the age of 12 and suddenly being totally blown away, completely blown away by the amazement, by the immensity of this landscape. And so again, a very embodied feeling of like the idea of you as a bordered body that is somehow intact and independent, autonomous in relation to what is going on around you, was completely blown away, and sort of a kind of joyous disintegration of myself was taking place.
Wow. So what is your understanding? Like, since I have a feeling, or when I look around, there are people for whom it's somehow easier to sense those subsensorial. Now we have this vocabulary. And for some other people, it's really hard. Why is it so? Is it like in your understanding, we are just trying to understand it, right? Like why is it so?
Yeah, I really don't have any sort of scientific or complete answer to that. The only thing I can think of is exactly this, that events in your life might sensitize you. There's an impulse of something where you are faced with a situation where your rationality will just not be enough to encounter what you're encountering. So then you have to kind of accept the fact that sometimes you will not be in control. And that might actually be that little opening that makes it possible for you to allow. Well, if you think about how the nervous system is trained to understand what's going on, to me that's actually quite clear that if the impulses coming in are different and they suggest other kind of forms of reality, your nervous system will integrate that, and it will become a part of. Yes, of course, there will be shamans and ghosts and the spirits on your eyes. Yes.
And what methods or what kind of techniques did you find kind of important or the most useful, like on that journey in kind of reading the signs and interpreting those subsensorial?
Well, for me, the key has been to in that journey of healing from mercury poisoning. I landed. I couldn't find any help with Western medicine. There was nothing there. The only thing they could conclude was that I don't have cancer. Because I couldn't eat, I couldn't digest, and I had all these cognitive problems and very weird symptoms. And the only thing they could say is that, well, you don't have cancer, and we find nothing else. We do find that you have spasms in your intestines. So the mysterious IBS was maybe potentially the thing. And actually, I had to find some other way to encounter what was going on with my body. And I found my way to healers. And let me tell you that I had never, ever thought that there is anything to get from healers. Like I was the rational, technocratic person the most technocratic person you could imagine. And suddenly I'm just in these situations where I'm getting herbal remedies and I'm getting balancing treatments. And then I went for reflexology because I really needed, this help. My inner organs were all in total funk. And reflexology was actually really good for stimulating and then recovering the functions. But then this person suggested that they do energy healing. And I didn't even know what that was. And then suddenly I just could see all these dark clouds lifting up from my body and flying out into the room. It's like this perfect hallucination, as someone might want to call it, that it was like, okay, I see. This is happening. And so energy healing became very much a way for me to be able to cope. I actually studied it later myself, and I think that what happens in the energy healing is exactly that kind of exchange, where the combination of you using your awareness, your psyche, to set an intention, sends messages to your body of your intention. It's thought becomes energy. And energy is expressed, for instance, through your hands. As soon as I set an intention, they start to heat up. It really happens. So, and then thank God, other people can sense it. And whatever it is, it's like the dancing on the soil. But this is now just very, very gentle touching. And it might reverberate, it might not. If it needs to, it will. And that's it. And the other thing that then started to happen when I started to do that was that I started to see things. And that again, for me, that's when I started to think about this term, subsensorial, because I couldn't explain that. It was like those clouds that were going out of my body, but then I started to see much, much more distinct things, hear things, and they were not things that came from me. They came from the exchange, not necessarily from the person, not from a ghost in the room, but as far as I see it, they came from the exchange. I have an intention, energy goes into my hands, something is reacting in the body that's receiving the energy, and that becomes some sort of reverberation that some part of my skin or cells in my body are reacting to, and then it's translating to images and words. And of course, again, my psyche takes that. It's my psyche that's interpreting. So there's this, I don't want to, what's really important for me is that I don't want to say that the messages are pure. That there is I don't want to get into that whole idea of that there is this one clear message that somehow so purely comes through to me that the message that I'm going to then utter is like God's word.
The truth.
Yeah, the truth. That's not it. It's a dialogue, an exchange. That's for me very important. So doing the exchange in the form of energy healing was my first way to understand that this is what happens. And this is something. And it has some kind of impact, because I also noticed that when I would then tell people what I saw, most often they had some relation to what it is. Like I didn't know what I saw. I tell them what I saw, and they're like, oh, okay, I know what this is. So I was like, okay, so this somehow works. But then to me, that really was the window into this whole, like a more sort of deepened dialogue that can become forms of language, forms of art that other people can see. So there's a way to communicate. So that was, in my mind, good. And I have to say that also talking to Lars Bang-Larsen in Sao Paulo. Lars was the curator who brought me to Sao Paulo. And so we had this conversation about what it is that I'm doing. And because he talked about helioitisika suprasensorial, that's when I actually did say, oh, but then what I'm doing is subsensorial.
Oh, okay.
So he needs to be credited for this. That I came up with it thanks to that dialogue.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was really amazing, because it was like, I said it, and then I was like, oh, that's actually not a bad word to describe it. But yes, and that was 2016. But after that, I have really been discovering exactly this, that it works also in other forms, not just in that one healing with person to person, human to human. It works in other ways, like landscape, atmosphere, bodies of water, or rocks, or
bacteria.
Of course. I mean, they're always there, right? My collaborator, Tina Gretasdottir, she's a visual anthropologist from Iceland. She has been researching for 10 years the turf house as a multi-species organism. So that's with the microbes, insects, humans, cows, sheep.
So how they are in relationship, right?
And how it really forms this eco-balance. And that how that is also a universe of knowledge registered in all the different organisms linked together. And when modernism stepped in and was like, whoa, these are old and nasty and people get sick here, and let's just destroy them. People should live in real houses. That universe was destroyed. So when we talk about these ends of worlds, that was one. And I mean, there are a few left, and we're actually now in July, we're going to go and visit one of them.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah.
So how they are exactly built?
The Icelandic turf house is quite a feat of engineering. It's half dug into the soil, and then they actually build these spaces between the house itself and then the mounds of turf, so that there is actually a way to drain and ventilate, so that you don't get moldy.
What about the floor? What is it made of? Do you know?
There are wooden floors, but there's a similar system. You have to have a drainage. You have to keep it dry. But then the turf really comes all over you, and you know that there are places where the cows live. There are the sheep. There are the living room. This bastue, sauna, really, and all under one and the same turf mound. So their entire villages almost like complex systems that they used to have. So it's very interesting. And of course, I mean, again, in Sao Paulo, I did that the first time I tested out, but now I also built my own house this way. And then at Alto, I built my office space this way. So,
really?
Not with the turf, but with clay and reed.
But you built it within the building, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, when I went to Alto, I discovered that there was some toxic mold there as well. And I was like, I just can't do another one of these that I'm teaching in cafes only. So I got permission to build a clay room inside the room. And we actually did a whole clinical research into this. with Mirja Salkenoja-Salonen, who's this mycologist in Finland, specialized in these problems with the indoor air, who would definitely be a person to talk to about subsensoriality, because she has been able to show that, for instance, how cells, they communicate to each other with bursts of gases that are sulfur. It's a type of sulfuric gas, as far as I can remember. I should check this. But, And they're like microbursts of gas. And just that burst will communicate to the other cell that, oh, okay, this is happening. And then onwards and onwards. So she really is there looking at these micro messages very much. And so she did a test with my playroom and the room outside the playroom, within which the playroom was. And she was able to show that there are similar molds growing inside. Well, could be, the spores are in the same spores are in the two rooms. But the spores in the big room, when she had them grow, they started to produce toxins. But the spores from my clay room, when they grew, they didn't produce toxins. And again, Juliana Fursi would say that's because the molds in the other room, the big room, are stressed. So they are defending themselves. And the mold that was growing in my clay room were happy. They didn't need to defend themselves. So again, it's this, what kind of when you build your environment, when you build your house, you should build it so that everybody will be happy, not just yourself and your kids and your dog, and also the insects and the molds and the microbes. They all should be happy. That's how you should build it.
Something I was really wondering regarding subsensorial. Like these days, I think there is more and more awareness regarding like hypersensitive personalities. So there is this term that's yes, there are people whose sensitivity is higher, and
you could talk about neurodiversity as well.
Exactly. And I was wondering how much these two are related in your opinion. Because we were already kind of touching upon this, that some people are more sensitive to those things or not. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how much, for example, like in a neurodiversity or hypersensitivity, this kind of plays a role, or it's just another wording to talk about it.
Yeah, well, to me, really, I do prefer neurodiversity because it more sort of maps out the possibility that people will have different neural systems, depending on, well, even genetically, but also even with what happened while you were still a fetus, or what kinds of genetic sort of expressions have you inherited from your parents, and then the mitochondria from your mother. I mean, there are many things that will come and play a part, and then also, of course, your experiences. So all of this builds up your sort of particular, unique neural system. And to me, that's a better way to talk about it than, for instance, simply talk about sensitivity, because a lot of times, and this is now very sociological to say this, when people say that you're hypersensitive, it's almost a kind of a blame.
That there's something wrong with you.
There's something wrong with you, not with our environment. Like you're the problem, not the environment. And it's not even that it's a problem. It would, for me, neurodiversity talks about the fact that we have so many different amazing ways to understand this world. And that is a richness. That's actually just like with the shamans, to have a dialogue with the Herrera shamans. It's amazing knowledge. Mm-hmm. Or like the turf house, a bank of a whole universe of knowledge. This would be so much more important to understand, rather than always just be like, here's the norm, this is how we should live, and everything else is sensitive or hyper or something else.
Is is it something that can play a role on like a societal or even political level? And how would it play?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's super important. One thing, of course, is this idea that, well, everybody's experience speaks of the world in different ways, and they're all valid, and they can all contribute or bring something to the greater understanding of where we are and how we should maybe be here. And then how we should be here, that's the political part. There's one argument is to say that learning to listen to other messages than just the ones that have been agreed upon, that these are scientific facts, could help every single person to have a more connected sense of being in the world, and with that being on this planet and being in contact with everything that's living and non-living here. So a very environmental concern, like learning to be environmentally aware. That could be one argument to make. And I do agree with that. But I also think that there's something in here that is instrumentalizing the whole idea. And it's a little frustrating. I mean, I really think that there's more to it than just environmental education. You know what I mean? Like that, because I don't want to say that, because we have all these different experiences about the world, our politics should change to encompass everybody, or everything's kumbaya. I think that that's also a way to instrumentalize, that it becomes a political program. And I don't think that that's going to answer to what we need. And then one more step. Why would it only serve humans? Like, what I'm talking about is not just a human thing or human knowledge. It's more.
Pia tells us that subsensorial events caused also by microbes are registered on a molecular and cellular level, yet they usually do not rise to human consciousness. Nevertheless, these events have an effect on our minds, bodies, and our sense of belonging to this world, our sense of connection. I'm looking forward to knowing more about her exploration in the subsensorial as a part of her doctoral research conducted at the Nordic Cultures and Environmental Politics at Lapland University in Finland. If you would like to know more about the show, listen to this episode again, or find previous episodes, please go to fermentradio.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. I'm always looking forward to hearing from you at hello@fermentradio.com. Ferment Radio is brought to you by Super Eclectic. This particular episode was recorded during a residency at the BioArt Society Finland and supported by Microbial Lives, Practices of New Human Microbial Cultures project at the Center for the Social Study of Microbes. I'm super grateful for that support, and most of all of our amazing Ferment Radio listeners. Keep fermenting and stay tuned for the next episode of Ferment Radio.